Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a story that's gonna make you think twice about those romantic lighthouse getaways you see on Instagram. This one comes from the coast of Maine, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. So grab your headphones, turn off the lights, and let's dive into the story of Beacon Point Lighthouse. You know what they say about lighthouses, right? They're supposed to guide ships safely to shore, keep sailors from crashing into the rocks. But sometimes they do the exact opposite. And that's exactly what happened at Beacon Point Lighthouse off the coast of Millfield, Maine. The year was 2019, and Jake Morrison had just landed what he thought was the perfect job. 26 years old, fresh out of a messy divorce, and desperately needing to get away from everything. When he saw the posting for a lighthouse keeper position, yeah, apparently those still exist, he jumped on it faster than you could say isolation therapy. The job was simple enough. Beacon Point Lighthouse had been automated for decades, but the Coast Guard still needed someone to maintain the equipment, do basic repairs, and keep an eye on things. The pay was decent, they'd provide housing, and the nearest neighbor was 12 miles away. For Jake, it sounded like paradise. The lighthouse sat on a rocky outcrop connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that disappeared completely during high tide. Built in 1847, the thing was a classic white tower, red roof, attached keeper's house that looked like something out of a postcard. The previous keeper, an old guy named Edmund Carver, had worked there for 37 years before retiring. 37 years. In the same isolated lighthouse. Jake couldn't imagine it. The handover was supposed to take 3 days. Carver would show him the ropes, introduce him to the equipment, then head back to civilization. But when Jake arrived on that gray October morning, something felt off. Carver was waiting for him at the base of the lighthouse, and man, this guy looked rough. 70-something years old, wild gray hair, eyes that seemed to look right through you. But it wasn't his appearance that unsettled Jake. It was the way he kept glancing up at the lighthouse beam, even though it was the middle of the day and the light wasn't even on. "You sure you want this job, son?" Carver asked as they walked toward the keeper's house. Jake laughed. "Little late to be asking that, don't you think?" Carver didn't smile. "Some jobs choose you. Others you gotta fight to survive." The first day of training went fine. Carver showed him how to maintain the LED beacon system, how to monitor the weather equipment, where the emergency supplies were kept. Standard stuff. But as the sun started to set, the old man's behavior got weird. "Listen carefully," Carver said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "The light goes on at sunset, off at sunrise. Automated. But sometimes..." He paused, staring out at the darkening ocean. "Sometimes it'll flicker. When it does, you go up to the lamp room and you reset the system. Don't matter what time it is. Don't matter if there's a storm. You reset it immediately." "Okay," Jake said slowly. "What happens if I don't?" Carver's face went pale. "Ships start coming in. Isn't that the point?" "Not those ships, son. Not those ships." That night, Jake barely slept. The lighthouse beam swept across his bedroom window every 12 seconds. He counted casting moving shadows on the walls. Around 3 a.m., he could have sworn he heard voices outside. Faint, distant, like people calling from far out at sea. But when he looked out the window, the ocean was empty. The second day, Carver seemed more agitated. He kept checking and rechecking the equipment, muttering under his breath. Jake tried to ask him about the voices, but the old man just shook his head. "You'll understand soon enough," was all he said. That evening, as they were finishing up the last of the training, Carver pulled out an old leather journal. "Every keeper's kept a log," he said, handing it to Jake. "Weather, ship sightings, maintenance notes, standard stuff." "But Jake," he grabbed the younger man's arm. "Whatever you do, don't read the entries from 1943. Just trust me on that." And then he was gone, just like that, packed his single duffel bag, got in his beat-up truck, and drove across the causeway without looking back. Jake stood there watching the taillights disappear, suddenly feeling very, very alone. The first few weeks went by without incident. Jake fell into a routine maintenance in the morning, paperwork in the afternoon, reading or watching Netflix in the evening. The isolation was actually kind of nice, peaceful. No ex-wife drama, no demanding boss, no traffic. Just him, the lighthouse, and the endless ocean. But then November rolled around, and things started getting strange. It began with the radio. The lighthouse had an old emergency radio that picked up Coast Guard chatter, weather reports, that sort of thing. But late at night, Jake started hearing other voices. Faint, crackling transmissions that sounded like they were coming from very far away. The weird thing was, they were using old-fashioned maritime language, stuff you'd hear in an old submarine movie. Bearing 270, distance unknown. Visibility poor, requesting guidance. Light ahead, thank God. Light ahead. Jake figured it was just atmospheric interference, radio waves bouncing off the ionosphere or something. But the voices were so clear, so urgent. And they always seemed to be coming from the same direction, due east, straight out into the Atlantic. Then came the night the lighthouse flickered. Jake was in the kitchen making a late dinner when he noticed the shadows on the wall stuttering. The steady sweep of the lighthouse beam was hiccuping. Flicker, flicker, normal rotation, flicker, flicker. He remembered Carver's words and immediately headed up the spiral staircase to the lamp room. The climb was steep, 127 steps, and by the time he reached the top, he was breathing hard. The lamp room was a circular space surrounded by massive lenses, and in the center sat the LED beacon array, humming quietly. Everything looked normal. No error lights, no loose connections. Jake hit the reset button anyway, and the flickering stopped immediately. He was about to head back down when he saw something that made his blood freeze. There was a ship out there, not a modern vessel. This thing looked like it belonged in a museum. A wooden sailing ship with tattered sails, sitting maybe half a mile offshore. And it was dark. No running lights, no radio beacon, nothing. Just sitting there in the black water like a ghost. Jake grabbed the binoculars from their hook and focused on the ship. Through the lenses, he could make out figures moving on the deck. People in old-fashioned clothing pointing toward the lighthouse. One of them, he swore this was true, waved at him. He blinked, adjusted the focus, looked again. The ship was gone. Jake stood there for 10 minutes, scanning the water in every direction. Nothing, just dark ocean and whitecaps in the distance. He convinced himself it had been a trick of the light, maybe some debris floating by. But deep down, he knew what he'd seen. The next morning, he called the Coast Guard to report the sighting. The duty officer was polite but skeptical. "No ships reported in that area last night, Mr. Morrison. You sure it wasn't just a fishing boat?" "This wasn't a fishing boat," Jake insisted. "It was... Look, it was like something out of the 1800s. Long pause. "Sir, we get reports like this sometimes from the Beacon Point area. Usually turns out to be weather phenomena, floating debris, that sort of thing. But we'll make a note of it." That afternoon, Jake did something he'd been putting off. He opened Carver's journal and started reading. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: weather observations, ship counts, maintenance notes. But as he flipped through the pages, he started noticing a pattern. Every few months, there'd be an entry about the light flickering. And every time, Carver had noted strange ship sightings afterward. Ships that appeared on radar but couldn't be reached by radio. Ships that looked wrong somehow. Ships that vanished without a trace. Jake's hands were shaking as he flipped to the section Carver had warned him about. 1943. And there, in faded ink, he found an entry that made his stomach drop. November 15th, 1943, light malfunctioned at 11:47 p.m. Went to reset and observed unknown vessel approaching from northeast. Vessel appeared to be military transport, possibly Liberty ship class. Attempted radio contact, no response. Ship continued toward rocks despite light signal. Impact at 12:23 a.m. Went to investigate at first light. No wreckage found. No survivors. No record of any ship reported missing. God help me, I think I'm going insane. November 16th, 1943, called Coast Guard. They have no record of any vessel in distress. Checked with harbor master in Millfield, no ships departed yesterday. But I saw it. I watched it sink. I heard the screams. November 20th, 1943. Light flickered again last night. Reset it immediately. No ships this time, thank God. But the voices on the radio are getting clearer. They're asking for guidance. They're asking for help. They think this is 1943. Jake slammed the journal shut, his heart pounding. This was insane. Carver had clearly been suffering from some kind of isolation-induced paranoia. Ghost ships? Time displacement? It sounded like the plot of a bad horror movie. But that night, the lighthouse flickered again. Jake was ready this time. He'd positioned himself in the lamp room before sunset, binoculars in hand, determined to prove to himself that whatever he'd seen before was just his imagination. The flicker started around 9 p.m., that same stuttering interruption in the beam's rotation. He hit the reset button, and the light stabilized. But as he turned to leave, he heard it. Voices, dozens of them, calling out from the darkness. Light ahead. Thank God, we're saved. Signal the lighthouse. Tell them we're coming in. Jake pressed his face against the glass, straining to see. And there they were, not one ship, but 3. Wooden vessels with canvas sails, running without lights, materializing out of the fog like something from another century. The lead ship was flying what looked like an American flag, but not the current one. This one had fewer stars. The ships were heading straight for the rocks. Without thinking, Jake grabbed the lighthouse's emergency spotlight and started signaling. Long, short, long, the international distress signal. He was screaming at them to turn away, even though he knew they couldn't hear him over the wind. The lead ship struck the rocks with a sound like thunder. Jake watched in horror as the wooden hull split open, spilling men into the churning water. The screams were horrible, desperate, terrified voices calling for help that would never come. The second ship tried to change course but was too close. It hit the rocks on the lighthouse's south side, rolling over completely before disappearing beneath the waves. The third ship managed to turn, but something was wrong with it. As it sailed past the lighthouse, Jake could see through its hull like it was made of glass. The crew was still working the rigging, still calling out orders, but they moved like sleepwalkers. And then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, all 3 ships were gone. The ocean was empty again, just dark water and the steady sweep of the lighthouse beam. Jake spent the rest of the night in the lamp room, staring out at the water, waiting for something else to appear. Nothing did. But when the sun came up, he made a discovery that nearly sent him running for the mainland. There was wreckage on the rocks below the lighthouse. Old, weathered wood, pieces of canvas, and carved into one of the larger pieces, barely visible but definitely there, were the words USS Liberty Bell, 1943. He researched that ship for hours. The USS Liberty Bell was a merchant vessel that had disappeared without a trace in November 1943, somewhere off the coast of Maine. All hands lost, no wreckage ever found. Until now. Jake called the Coast Guard again, but how do you explain finding 76-year-old wreckage that appeared overnight? They promised to send someone out to investigate, but the next high tide washed everything away before they could arrive. The flickering started happening more often after that. Sometimes every few nights, sometimes multiple times in one night. And every time Jake would see ships. Ships from different eras, sailing vessels from the 1800s, steamships from the early 1900s, military transports from World War II. All of them drawn to the lighthouse like moths to a flame. All of them meeting the same fate on the rocks below. The worst part wasn't watching them crash. It was watching them try to signal back. Jake started recognizing the patterns: Morse code, flag signals, desperate flashing lights. They were trying to communicate, trying to tell him something. But what? The answer came in December, during the worst storm Jake had ever experienced. 60-mile-per-hour winds, waves crashing over the causeway, the lighthouse shaking like it might collapse. The power went out around midnight, and Jake had to switch to the emergency generator to keep the beacon running. That's when he found the hidden room. The generator was acting up, and Jake was checking the wiring in the basement when he noticed something odd about one of the walls. It looked newer than the rest, like it had been bricked up recently. Recent being relative, the mortar was old, but not original construction old. He found a crowbar and started chipping away. Behind the false wall was a small chamber, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. And inside was a desk, a chair, and stacks upon stacks of journals, all written in the same handwriting, all signed by the same person, Edmund Carver, but not the Carver that Jake had met. These journals went back decades: 1985, 1992, 2003, 2011. Entry after entry describing the same thing Jake had been experiencing. The flickering light, the ghost ships, the crashes. And in the most recent journal, dated just a few months before Jake's arrival, he found the truth. The lighthouse isn't guiding ships to safety. It's guiding them to their doom. Every time the light flickers, it's not malfunctioning. It's calling to them. Ships that were lost in these waters, pulled back by some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. The government knows. They've known for decades. That's why they keep this place staffed. Not to maintain the lighthouse, but to maintain the secret. The keeper's job isn't to fix the light. It's to make sure nobody else finds out what's really happening here. To reset the system before the anomaly can fully manifest. To keep the dead from finding their way back to the world of the living. But I can't do it anymore. 37 years of watching ships full of dead men crash into these rocks. 37 years of hearing their voices, their pleas for help. I'm done. Let someone else carry this burden. Jake's hands were shaking as he read. This couldn't be real. But even as he tried to convince himself it was all the ravings of an isolated old man, the lighthouse beam flickered overhead. He ran up the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. In the lamp room, the beacon was stuttering again, but this time it was different. Instead of random flickers, it was pulsing in a pattern. Long, short, short, long. Over and over. Morse code. It was spelling out a message. GLP. And that's when Jake saw them. Not one ship, not 3, but dozens. Sailing ships, steamers, modern cargo vessels, military destroyers. All of them approaching through the storm, all of them flickering in and out of existence like old film projection. The radio crackled to life. Beacon Point Light. This is the merchant vessel Sarah Jane. Requesting immediate assistance. We are taking on water and need safe harbor. Jake grabbed the radio. Sarah Jane, this is Beacon Point. Turn away immediately. You are heading for rocks. Repeat, turn away. Beacon Point, we can see your light. We're following your signal. ETA 15 minutes. No! Jake screamed into the radio. The light is wrong. Turn away. But they couldn't hear him. Or maybe they could hear him, but they couldn't understand. They were following the light, just like they had when they were alive. Just like they'd been doing for over a century. Jake did the only thing he could think of. He grabbed an axe from the emergency kit and started smashing the lighthouse equipment. The beacon died instantly, plunging the coastline into darkness. The radio went silent, and one by one, the ghost ships faded away like morning mist. But Jake's relief was short-lived, because in the sudden darkness, he heard something that made his blood turn to ice. Footsteps, coming up the lighthouse stairs. Heavy, wet footsteps like someone walking in waterlogged boots. And voices, dozens of voices, all whispering the same thing. Why did you turn off our light? Jake barricaded himself in the lamp room, but the footsteps kept coming. Closer and closer. And through the windows, he could see shapes moving in the darkness below. Figures in old-fashioned clothing, sailors' uniforms, maritime gear from different eras. All of them looking up at the lighthouse with hollow, desperate eyes. They'd been drawn to this place for so long that even in death, even as spirits, they couldn't let go. The lighthouse was their anchor to the world of the living. And Jake had just cut their lifeline. The doorknob rattled. Then the pounding started. Fists against wood, getting more violent by the second. Jake grabbed the emergency radio and called the Coast Guard. Mayday, mayday, this is Beacon Point Lighthouse. I need immediate evacuation. The lighthouse is compromised and I'm in immediate danger. The response came back garbled, full of static. Beacon Point, copy your transmission. Weather conditions. Cannot, repeat, cannot reach your position until Storm passes. The pounding stopped. Jake held his breath, straining to listen. Had they given up? Were they gone? Then he heard a voice, clear as day, right outside the lamproom door. Mr. Morrison. It was Carver, but not the Carver he'd met. This voice was younger, stronger, the voice of a man in his prime. Mr. Morrison, you need to turn the light back on. Carver, Jake called out. How are you here? You left days ago. I never left, son. None of us ever leave. We just change shifts. Jake's blood went cold. What do you mean? The lighthouse needs a keeper, someone to maintain the balance, someone to make sure the dead don't spill over into the world of the living. I did it for 37 years. Now it's your turn. That's insane. I'm leaving. I'm getting out of here. Look outside, Jake. Really look. Against his better judgment, Jake peered through the lamproom windows. The storm had passed, and he could see the causeway in the moonlight, or rather where the causeway used to be. The narrow strip of land that connected the lighthouse to the mainland was gone, completely submerged, higher than he'd ever seen it. The tide doesn't work like that, Jake whispered. Time doesn't work like that either, Carver's voice replied. But here we are. Jake checked his phone. No signal. He tried the radio. Dead static. The satellite internet connection. Nothing. It was like the lighthouse had been cut off from the world entirely. This isn't real, Jake said to himself. This is a breakdown. Isolation psychosis. That's all this is. But even as he said it, he could hear them outside. Hundreds of voices now, all calling up to the lighthouse. Some speaking English, others in languages he didn't recognize. All of them pleading for the light. Jake realized he had a choice. He could turn the lighthouse back on and accept whatever cosmic horror was happening here. Or he could refuse and... What happened to lighthouse keepers who refused? He found out when he looked down at his own hands. They were translucent. He could see right through them to the floor below. And when he looked in the reflection of the lamp-room glass, his face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked exactly like the figures he'd seen on the rocks. No, he whispered. No, this isn't happening. But it was, because that's how Beacon Point Lighthouse worked. It needed a keeper, someone to maintain the balance between the living and the dead. And if the current keeper couldn't handle the job, well, there were always plenty of candidates among the lost souls who'd crashed on these rocks over the years. Jake had a choice, but it wasn't the choice he thought he had. He could turn the light back on and spend the next few decades shepherding ghost ships to their doom, slowly losing his humanity until he became just another specter haunting the lighthouse. Or he could refuse and join the ranks of the dead immediately. Some choice, right? He turned the light back on. The voices stopped. The footsteps faded. And Jake Morrison began his new career as the keeper of Beacon Point Lighthouse. That was 6 years ago. The official records show that Jake Morrison resigned from his position in December 2019 due to personal reasons and moved to California. But if you drive up to Millfield, Maine, and ask the locals about Beacon Point Lighthouse, they'll tell you different. They'll tell you about the young guy who took the job and never came back. They'll tell you about the mysterious new keeper who started around the same time. A pale, quiet man who only comes to town for supplies once a month and never talks to anyone. And if you're really unlucky, they might tell you about the job posting that shows up every few years. Good pay, housing provided, isolated location perfect for someone looking to get away from it all. The listing is still up, by the way. I checked. They're looking for a new lighthouse keeper. The current guy, according to the posting, is ready to retire after several years of dedicated service. So if you're ever feeling like you need a change of pace, like you want to get away from the stress of modern life, maybe consider a career in lighthouse keeping. Beautiful coastal location, minimal supervision, plenty of time to think. Just maybe avoid Beacon Point. Trust me on that one, because some jobs don't just take your time, they take your soul. And that's tonight's story, folks. Sweet dreams, everyone. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember, if you've got a creepy story you want to share, drop it in the comments below. Until next time, keep your lights on.